we're now going to the next segment, which is the Declaration of Independence, a missed opportunity. The 13 colonies were the freest colonies in the world. The world had never known such free, self-governing colonies. That's why they revolted. Because the British, having won the war against France, having amassed a debt, a government debt, which would be laughable in comparison with the debt of just New South Wales. A tiny debt, but they thought it was terrible, and they decided that they should collect this. And since the American colonists weren't paying much in tax, and the British were paying a bigger part of the tax, still very small, that they would tax the American colonies. They then made a serious error. They should have consulted the colonies. That was their mistake. And remember that this wasn't the constitutional monarchy which we know today, which I call Constitutional Monarchy Mark II, which dates from just before Victoria. The Westminster system that we know now, the idea that a government must have the confidence of the lower house, is a relatively recent idea. It only dates really from just before Victoria. These things emerged in our system. We didn't have some academic sitting in an ivory tower writing a constitution and then revolutionaries imposing it. These things emerged by trial and error, probably the best way, and that's how the Constitutional Monarchy Mark II emerged, under which governments must have the confidence of the lower house. Now, George III was the executive head under Constitutional Monarchy Mark I, and he made serious errors. The ministers didn't have to have the confidence of the lower house of the House of Commons, they had to have the confidence of the king. And the king made an error. Had Edmund Burke, for example, a great philosopher, political philosopher, not been in opposition, had he been in government, there would have been no war of independence. What George III, I think, should have done, had he been a man of greater depth, not criticising him, he used to talk to the trees, and we have other members of the royal family who talk to plants, that's not uncommon, is it? But George III didn't have the foresight. You know, not everybody has great foresight. He didn't have the foresight to realise that something like the Commonwealth would emerge, that there would be different realms. And he still saw them as colonies and subject to the direction of London. And the sort of people he put in the government had a similar view. Now, what I'm going to put to you, John, is, was this a missed opportunity?
Oh, I think it absolutely was. And I think that, I agree with you. I think Edmund Burke, the Scottish philosopher, writer, who was a member of the Whig Party, the Whig Party was founded on the principles of supporting constitutional monarchy in opposition to absolute monarchy. That's really one of the core tenets of the Whig Party. And Edmund Burke argued very vocally against this taxation policy with 13 colonies. So I think if he would have won that argument, I agree with you. I think that there probably wouldn't have been a revolution or a declaration of independence. So I think it was an absolute missed opportunity on the part of the British, because look at the way that North America, not just the United States as well, has developed into this incredible economic power and a global military power. And I think that there's the special relationship which was defined by Winston Churchill after the Second World War. But I think that there could have been a possibility that the United States was treated as a dominion, or like Canada. And I think so. It's absolutely, I think, a missed opportunity on the case of the British.
That concept of dominions and of the colony having its own government responsible to its own lower house came really in Canada only after the British saw that they were going down the same path. And there was a report, the Durham report, not your Durham report in the United States, which hasn't yet seen the light of day, that the President was lamenting hasn't been published yet. Not the report by Durham, who's looking into all sorts of strange things that happened under the Trump presidency. The Durham report was to quell the problems in Canada, you have to introduce into Canada responsible government, meaning instead of having a governor from London telling you what to do, in each of the Canadian colonies, and let them be formed into a federation, in each of them there will be a government which will emerge from the lower house, which must have the confidence of the lower house. That was then applied in Australia in the middle of the 19th century. I think the British establishment, not people like Edmund Burke, missed the key to the Declaration, what would emerge in the Declaration of Independence. And the key, I would say, in the Declaration of Independence was already in Britain in the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution was to end absolute monarchy. James I was sent packing to France, and they brought in William and Mary from Holland, Mary being the daughter of the king, and they introduced constitutional monarchy Mark I. But the whole point was the Lockean principle, the principle from John Locke, and it's, I think, in the very central part of the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The point, the key to that is they are endowed by their Creator. This is not a plea for religion. This is saying men and women are born with rights. These rights are not given by monarchs. They're not given by politicians. You have these rights. People have these rights. This is the core to the Glorious Revolution, but the Americans put it into the Declaration of Independence. And if I could just take something from Churchill and ask you to comment on it. Churchill, in a speech in Westminster about the Declaration of Independence, says the Declaration of Independence is not only an American document, it follows on the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights as the third great title deed on which the liberties of the English-speaking people are based. He sees the Declaration of Independence as much ours, as much the British, as it is the Americans. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the passage you read from the Declaration of Independence, where you're talking about the rights of man, applied to anyone at the time who was white. It didn't apply to people who were black, who were only considered 3/5 of a person. So it did take some time to get that worked out, but it did eventually. But I completely agree that that the point of that is that the rights are not given by the monarch or by the president or by a parliament, but they are natural rights. And so I think that that's absolutely correct. And I think that that those founding documents that Churchill combines into that statement that you read, I think it's absolutely correct. I think that's what our Western society, Anglo-Saxon society, is based on.
If we could then go on to the next topic, and we'll stop in a moment because some of the young ambassadors might wish to ask questions. And I'm going to go ahead from some of these topics. As I say, we will record these separately later and put them onto our channel so that you can watch them on the channel.